Whether you're drafting this weekend or if you've already drafted, these are players that I think you're going to regret not having drafted if you don't take them this season. Let's start with the man of the hour himself, Bill Krosky Merritt. What a name. What a name. Burst onto the scene during training camp, got a ton of positive hype, and enough positive hype to where, people are like, yeah, he could end up being the starter next year or something like that. And the Commanders were like, actually, we're going to go ahead and trade Brian Robinson away. I don't think they traded Brian Robinson away because they were comfortable with Austin Eckler or Chris Rodriguez or Jeremy McNichols. No, I think they did it because they were comfortable with Bill Krosky Merritt. And old Bill, let's talk about this for a minute because it really depends on where you're drafting him. The hype obviously has been very real with this rookie running back out of Arizona. Clearly, he is starting to go higher in fantasy football drafts now, but it all depends on who you're drafting with. Because I've done some drafts where I've done domain leagues with some of our listeners, some of you guys, and I've seen Jacory Krosky Merritt go as high as like the 7th, 8th round. And I actually saw a screenshot on Twitter. Hey, so he went in the 5th round today. Probably not a fan of that price, right? Because realistically, you're going to see a pretty heavy split, a pretty heavy committee in that Washington backfield. But with Jacory Krosky Merritt, I do think he's probably the guy to own there. And if you can get him at the right price, I think he's going to be somebody who like, yeah, we probably should have drafted this guy. Because you're getting a guy, he is an unknown, but he's going around guys that are known and they're just not very talented running backs, or they're clear running back 2 on their team, whereas Bill Krosky Merritt could be the running back 1 for his team, depending on how things shake out. I just did a home league draft this weekend where I was drafting with people who probably don't pay anywhere close to the amount of attention I pay to play to fantasy football. And I got Bill Krosky Merritt in like the 10th, 11th round, like at the 10-11 turn. And so depending on who you're playing with, if you're drafting with casuals, if you're drafting with your work buddies, if you're drafting with your friends who don't really follow fantasy football like you do, who aren't watching videos like this one, then you could probably get away with snagging Jacory Krosky Merritt pretty late in the draft. And again, anytime you can get a running back that is getting significant volume, especially in one of the best offenses in the NFL, the Washington Commanders projected one of the top 5 offenses this year, according to Vegas lines, in the entire NFL. Anytime you can get pieces of an offense like that, you do it. But especially a running back. The floor with running backs like that is extremely high. And who is his competition? Again, Chris Rodriguez, Jeremy McNichols, never done anything. Austin Eckler. And I get Austin Eckler might be a pass-catching guy there this year, and I think they both can be productive. I think it could easily turn out to be, hey, Jacory Krosky Merritt, here's the red zone touches for you. And so, anytime you can buy into a piece of an elite offense like the Washington Commanders offense, where you see teams making a move around a certain player or they're moving off of players at a position, I think you pounce. And if you're getting Bill Krosky Merritt in the 9th, 10th, 11th round, I'm feeling pretty good about that price. I think we could easily regret not drafting him this season. All right, let's go to the Cincinnati Bengals and talk about Chase Brown. And Chase Brown, obviously, last year kind of burst onto the scene because they didn't really have a running back going into last year. You remember, they brought in Zach Moss. Zach Moss didn't do much last year. And then, Chase Brown kind of came onto the scene a little bit later here. Played in 16 games last year. He didn't really start, though, for the first 4 or 5 weeks. Ended up with 990 rushing yards and 360 receiving yards on 54 receptions, had 11 touchdowns, and averaged, again, 16 points per game. This is a guy that wasn't even starting the entire season. So really, when you're looking at the portion of time where Chase Brown was starting, he was an 18 points per game plus player. He really was. And so the upside is very real. But really what this goes back to is drafting players in good offenses, right? And the Cincinnati Bengals, again, one of those other top 5 projected offenses in the NFL and going into the season. And Chase Brown's going to be a big part of that. You saw that last year. Again, Chase Brown, if you had him on your fantasy roster last year, he was absolutely winning you leagues down the stretch in 2024. Looking at this last, really since week 9 on, 26, 22, 19, 19, 24, 26, and then 13 and 13 touches or points in week 16, 17. That stretch was insane, y'all. And again, in the first 5 weeks of the season, only played 33, 20, 24, 40, and 33% of the snaps. Depending on where you're drafting, what platform, who you're drafting with, Chase Brown could be a 2nd-round pick. Like in the Flock League, for example, obviously a lot of sharp players in the Flock League. Chase Brown goes as a 2nd-round pick, but Aki takes him, and that's to be expected. However, in your home leagues or in your casual leagues that you might be drafting this weekend, if you see Chase Brown on the board anywhere really past the 2-8, you are smash picking him. You are literally, you cannot pick that fast enough in a 12-team league. And in a 10-team league, you're probably talking about he's getting to the beginning of the 3rd round and you're taking him there. But anytime he's in the 3rd round in any format, Chase Brown's going to be somebody this year I think is going to have a very high floor. but also has a very high ceiling just because of the offensive situation that he is playing in. And while, Chase Brown last year wasn't the most efficient guy on the ground, I do think that this year he has the running back room completely to himself. You're going to see him start from week 1, which is a difference from last year. And again, playing in that type of offensive situation, I think he's, obviously, clearly he cemented his role enough to where the Bengals didn't really feel like they needed to bring anybody else in. And so Chase Brown, I think he's going to be very good this year again. And I think if you're looking for a running back to pair with a wide receiver in the second round, I think that Chase Brown's the way to go, just because when you look at the other guys in that offense, guys like Jonathan Taylor not playing in as good an offense, Bucky Irving obviously playing in a good offense, but Chase Brown also playing in a good offense, and maybe Chase Brown has higher ceiling than Bucky Irving, which I think I would agree with as well. Other guys there, Devon Achane, who knows what that situation is going to look like. And Achane has more explosive ability and more upside than Chase Brown, but Chase Brown might have a higher floor than Devon Achane. In fact, I would venture to say that he does. And so Chase Brown's somebody this year that I think we're going to look back and we're going to look at second, third round prices and be like, why didn't we take more of this guy? I have personally taken Chase Brown in the second round a couple times. I'm going to continue to do so. And again, if you're getting him in the third round of your fantasy football leagues, you should do so. If you have your draft coming up this weekend, we actually have the perfect tool to help you with your draft, where we basically just have cheat sheets for every platform, every draft position, 12 and 10 team. Doesn't matter which format you're playing in. We have the algorithm all ready to go for you, and you could basically use it during your draft to kill your league mates, because again, a lot of times on these platforms, you've got super big value fallers. And so we have them all written down with our player database. We have the risk, upside, and floor scores for each of these players as well. And so make sure you check it out. You can get it for free with the season pass. It gets you everything, access to the entire site for literally 6 months. It gets you until December. It takes care of you the entire season. Is $30. So go check it out. We've got it down in the pinned comment. You can check it out below. Okay, I drafted this guy in the Flock League and I haven't really talked about it. And so this is going to be my video where I talk about why I made this pick, because I wasn't a huge fan of this guy. I definitely made fun of Nathan, for being a huge fan of this guy, because he definitely is. But when I was on the clock in the Flock League at the 6-7 turn, that was the hardest set of picks that I made in that draft by far. Again, this is the most viewed fantasy football draft on YouTube, period. And so the pressure is definitely on. And while I was comfortable for most of the draft, I got to the 6-7 turn and I was like, man, I really have no idea who to go here. I had guys like Jordan Addison on the board. I had guys like Chris Godwin on the board. I had guys like Sam Laporta on the board, who I ended up taking. But ultimately, even though I liked the upside of some of the other guys there, I thought I would regret it if I did not take really the only rookie wide receiver going in this range that is the number one option on his team, most likely, that is on a team where he is pretty much the only healthy wide receiver, and that went in the first round and was selected as a first-round wide receiver on a team that they haven't really done that at all in the past 20 years, and that's Matthew Golden. I straight up was in that room, and I'm telling you, going through my mind was like, I'm going to regret it if I don't take him. I'm going to regret it if I don't take him. You have to take the upside shot on rookie wide receivers. That's what was going through my mind, and I stand by it. That's why I drafted Matthew Golden. And obviously, Matthew Golden's analytical profile is so-so. His production at Texas, if you aren't familiar with his college football production profile, not that great. But you did notice, if you watched any of the college football playoff last year, he kind of came on at the end of the year. And the Packers, again, historically, not drafting receivers with their first-round pick, but they go and take a shot on Matthew Golden. And I think this speaks volumes to what kind of talent they think that Matthew Golden is. And the thing about league winners in fantasy football, true league winners, because to be honest with you, T. Higgins was a league winner last year, and you weren't getting him super late. I got him in the 5th round of the Flock League. But players can be league winners that aren't, Puka Nacua. Puka Nacua type players don't happen. Kyron Williams type players don't happen, right? And so I think in terms of when you're looking at guys who are genuinely getting you league-winning high rates, typically they're rookie wide receivers going in the 5th to 7th round. And so you always want one of those guys on your team. And Emeka Egbuka is another good example of this. This year, I think he's another guy you might regret not drafting. But Matthew Golden, even more, clear opportunity to be a wide receiver one than Emeka Egbuka. And he's playing on an offense, the Green Bay Packers offense, projected top 12 offense in the NFL, and an offense that has consistently put out high volume production in terms of fantasy football points. And so with Matthew Golden, look, I didn't love him as a prospect, but Jaden Reed is hurt. Romeo Doubs is just a guy there. Christian Watson is hurt. You've got Tucker Kraft there, and I think he's more of a red zone threat. And the way they were using Matthew Golden in the preseason, I mean, they were really using him on quick routes. You saw him catch a couple slants, 8 yards down the field. A couple quick hitters, which, talk about Matthew Golden's speed. I actually really like to see them using him like that. I think he has more upside because of the, unknown, because of the situation, because of the offense, than any player in that range, especially any wide receiver. And so I thought I would regret it if I didn't take Matthew Golden. I stand by my choice. I'm excited to have him in my flex spot, and I am praying that he has I'm praying that he has a historic rookie season. I think it's unlikely, but I do think that he's somebody that if he hits, we're all going to look back and be like, I could have had him right there in the 7th round. He's going in the 7th round pretty much every time, and so you can easily get him. I want to pivot back now to actually another pick I made in the Flock League, and I'm not just going to sit here and tout my Flock League draft. I'm just giving you some logic on why I made the picks that I did. I'm not going to go overboard ranking these guys super high or anything like that. But one of the reasons I chose Terry McLaurin 2 rounds earlier than Matthew Golden was because I thought I was getting Terry McLaurin at the time at a discount because he was not signed with the Washington Commanders yet. And when you're looking at Terry last year, I mean, Terry was the wide receiver 7. And from a statistics standpoint, not a whole lot changed. I mean, he averaged the same yards per catch as he had pretty much the rest of his career. He had the same amount of targets he's had pretty much the rest of his career. He had slightly more receptions, but pretty much the same amount of receptions he's had the rest of his career. So what changed with Terry McLaurin? He went from 4, 5, 5, and 4 touchdowns from 2020 to 2023 to 13 touchdowns in 2024. And while I think regression is a likely thing, there is something to be said about wide receivers who are just good at catching touchdowns. See Jordan Addison, for example. We thought Jordan Addison was a regression candidate last year. We ended up looking stupid for it because he's just going to catch touchdowns in that offense. Terry McLaurin is the favorite target of one of the best young quarterbacks in the entire NFL on one of the best offenses in the NFL. And they just paid him $96 million over 3 years to stay there in Washington. That type of financial commitment. What do you think that's going to lead to on the field? Now, I will say this. I'm going to concede this. I am a little bit worried about Terry, especially at the beginning of the season, because he has not been there in camp. I'm not really worried about the install stuff because he's a veteran, so I don't think the install stuff's going to be a very big issue. But I am worried because, a lot of times what you see is players that aren't in training camp, that aren't practicing, they, come in and they play the beginning of the season after they get their money and they get hurt. You saw that with Brandon Ayuk last year, where they come in and they're not very good. And so with Terry, I do think that's probably the main concern with him, because realistically, if we're looking at what he was able to do last year, again, the wide receiver 7 in PPR leagues, he should be going a lot higher than this. See, I got him at the 4-5 turn. Again, the number 1 wide receiver in a top 5 offense in the NFL. And so I'm not sure. I haven't seen a ton of drafts to suggest that his price or his value has gone up a lot or significantly in redraft leagues just yet. But I do think that Terry McLaurin, even in the mid-4th or late 4th round, is a good value for your fantasy team, because you're drafting him at that point to be probably your wide receiver 2. And at the point where you're drafting Terry McLaurin, again, one of the better wide receivers, one of the highest paid wide receivers on an annual basis now, on one of the best offenses in the NFL. I mean, it checks every box. It's a no-brainer. And I get there's some risk. There's some risk there with, him not being in camp or whatever. But in my opinion, in the late 4th round, the risk is absolutely baked into his price. So if you can draft Terry McLaurin this year, I feel like he's going to be a great guy for you to have on your fantasy football rosters. Another guy I want to talk about that we haven't really talked about in a positive light a ton this season is Tony Pollard. I've had my eyes open a little bit with Tony Pollard, but here's why Tony Pollard's somebody I definitely think you should be drafting if you haven't already drafted. And if he's also going to be a trade target for us going into week 1. With Tyjae Spears being out and being placed on, I think, IR, so it's the first 4 games guaranteed that Tyjae Spears is going to be out. Tony Pollard's going to have this backfield all to himself, and that's definitely going to be a good thing for him. Last year, he ran the ball more than he ever had in his career, had 260 attempts, still averaged 4.15 yards per carry, definitely not the 5.3, 5.2 Dallas Tony Pollard we saw, but still efficient enough. The problem is he only had 5 touchdowns, and his receiving upside has been about the same as it was, and so he ended up finishing about where he did in 2023. But I want to stress to you, the situation in Tennessee for Tony Pollard last year, significantly worse than it is this year. In fact, a lot of people are going out of their way to talk about the upgrades that the Titans have made at the offensive line, and that could have a direct correlation to Tony Pollard's fantasy football success. When you couple the fact that he's going to have it all to himself for the first 4 weeks and the fact that they made that offensive line better there in Tennessee, I think it leads to either A, you draft Tony Pollard and he's an absolute stud and you just keep him and flex him every week because you're drafting him to flex him, which is an insane flex option. I love running backs as flex options because of the high floor they give you every single week with guaranteed volume, okay? There are not a ton of wide receivers that have guaranteed every week volume, but most running backs do, especially starting running backs. So between you're getting him as a flex option, them upgrading the offensive line, Tyjae Spears being out, I think worst case scenario, you're looking at maybe flipping him after 4 weeks, but I think you could just end up keeping him. And again, right now, he's going pretty cheap. I think he's moved up a little bit here, where now he's going in the 6th, 7th round. But when you're looking at the other running backs in that range, Isaiah Pacheco is going in that range, right? And there's a lot. There are question marks with Isaiah Pacheco, even though he's on a good offense. You've also got rookies like Caleb Johnson, R.J. Harvey going in that range. And every rookie has question marks. Tony Pollard, is 28. He's still on a decent contract for the Titans, and I think this year he is set up to do slightly better than he did last year, and honestly, improving on that would get him into the teens in terms of his running back finish, and he's really being drafted right now around the running back 20. And so it seems like a good return on investment. Again, a guy that's really not going to be sharing a backfield. You've got Khalil Mullings there, who's going to be splitting that backfield with him. I like Khalil Mullings, by the way, but I don't think Khalil Mullings is going to be a guy you want to roster on your fantasy football teams. I think Tony Pollard is set up to be a guy who could actually be a good pick this year. I picked him last year in the Flock League, didn't get him this year. I'm starting to maybe think that I should have gotten him. So, all right. Let's go to that Chiefs offense I was just talking about Xavier Worthy. I think the thing that people are overlooking with Xavier Worthy here is the fact that, at the end of last season, nobody can deny the 3-game stretch, really, from weeks 15 to 17, so the fantasy football playoffs last year, where Xavier Worthy got you 19, 20, and 22 points on 11, 11, and 9 targets. Really, there were 2 main differences in his production the last 3 weeks of the season versus the first 14. The biggest one, though, and the most important one, is the fact that his target volume went up significantly at the end of the season. Obviously, that was with Rashee Rice not on the field. And Rashee Rice really is the X factor when you're talking about drafting Xavier Worthy and why it may be or may not be a good pick this year. You saw it the last 3 weeks there. He was the wide receiver 1, and what was he doing? He was putting up 20 points per game. And I'm not saying he's going to do that this year, but what is Xavier Worthy capable of compared to what he did last year? Last year, in his rookie year, he was the wide receiver 33 in fantasy football, okay? And I already mentioned at the end of the year, very good. But overall, he averaged 11 points per game. I think he could easily average 15 points per game in that offense. But in turn, if Rashee Rice is risky and we are moving him down our boards, then the wide receiver 1 there, which becomes, again, Xavier Worthy, should be moved up boards. Xavier Worthy has a pretty solid all-around profile for a guy coming out of college who obviously is very small, 5'11", 165 pounds, very skinny, but a complete burner. We know this. He's a burner, right? But a lot of people look at Xavier Worthy and think he's a deep threat and he's just fast. But again, at the point where you're getting 11 targets a game, and you saw that in the last 2 games of the year, of the last 3 games of the year, and you also saw his average depth of target, 7, 9, and 9. He was getting those quick routes. I will say this: if Rashee Rice plays most of the season, I could see a scenario where Xavier Worthy goes back up to 15 yards per target or whatever, 16 yards per target, and becomes one of those big play guys again. You remember week 1 last year, obviously he had 20 points on 3 targets, and obviously had, I think, a rushing touchdown there as well. If Rice plays most of the season, I could see Xavier Worthy being a bust this year. So that could just be one more reason that we could regret not drafting Xavier Worthy onto our fantasy football teams this year. Again, playing on one of the best offenses in the NFL. You'll notice that's a pretty common thing for most of these guys. Besides Tony Pollard here, all these guys are playing on very good offenses, and my next guy is technically an exception as well. But, I mean, again, that offense with Patrick Mahomes, you can't help but take his weapons there. And Xavier Worthy right now is going in the 5th round. The wide receiver 1 in Kansas City, the only weapon that's going. He is the first offensive player from Kansas City that goes off the board, and he goes in the 5th round. And again, this is a top 3 projected offense this year. I think people are going to look back at Xavier Worthy and be like, man, with the confusion around Rice, with the fear around his suspension, we should have just taken more Worthy. That's what I think is going to happen. And then finally, DK Metcalf. And I make this video and I say DK Metcalf is somebody that I will regret not drafting because I actually don't think I've drafted a DK yet. I was pretty high on DK, especially from a Dynasty perspective, telling Dynasty teams to trade for him. And now I look at DK and I'm like, well, he's playing on the Steelers. Ugh. He's playing with Aaron Rodgers. Ugh. But there's really something that I think I've been neglecting to realize is I've had DK Metcalf available to me in the 5th round of almost every single draft. And in home leagues, casual leagues, you're going to get DK in the 6th round, by the way. What I'm failing to realize here is that DK Metcalf is going to be Aaron Rodgers' wide receiver 1. And you saw Aaron Rodgers support 2 high-end, fantasy-relevant wide receivers last year. And I know Aaron Rodgers wasn't that good, but his receivers were that good. Both Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams. I think they were both wide receiver 1s when it was all said and done. And so when you're looking at the other skill position guys there, I mean, obviously they brought in Caleb Johnson at running back, but they got Jalen Warren. Nothing special there. In terms of their wide receiver room, woof, right? They have Pat Freiermuth, they have Jonnu Smith at tight end, but their wide receivers, you're talking about guys like Calvin Austin there. Guys like Roman Wilson. I think Roman Wilson's even hurt right now. There's nobody there. DK is going to be the guy, just being the most talented guy there, the most experienced veteran wide receiver in that room. he is going to be the guy that Aaron Rodgers throws the ball to. And while I don't think Aaron Rodgers is the Aaron Rodgers of old, I don't think he's MVP Aaron Rodgers, I don't think he's anywhere close to the MVP Aaron Rodgers, we did see last year that he can support fantasy wide receivers at an extremely high level. And so I think I'm going to personally regret not drafting a lot of DK Metcalf this year, just because I think there is a chance he's a top 15 wide receiver again this year. And the thing with DK is he's very consistent. When you're looking at like what he's done over his career, he typically gets around 1,000, 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns. Like really, you've seen that be pretty much his consistent production output. And last year, for DK, obviously, again, he's played his whole career with the Seahawks, but 1,000 yards last year and 5 touchdowns, but he only played in 15 games. So if you do the math, that extrapolates to about 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns. But DK really hasn't averaged, ever since his sophomore year in 2020, averaged 17 points per game. He hasn't averaged above 15 points per game since then. I would not be surprised if this were the year that DK Metcalf broke that and went back above 15 points per game, because he is the only guy in that offense, and is an offense that I think they're going to end up passing the ball a lot. Because if Caleb Johnson's in the doghouse right now, I don't think they're going to give Jalen Warren workhorse touches. Who are they going to give the ball to? Who's getting the ball in that offense? Jonnu? I mean, DK is literally the guy there for Aaron Rodgers. And so I think I'm going to regret not taking a lot of DK, and I'd like to get this out here so maybe you can take some DK Metcalf. Again, you're drafting him to flex on your fantasy team. I think he's a great flex option. Unfortunately, Mason is flexing him in the flock league, and that makes me really sad. So, all right, do me a huge favor. Make sure you drop a like on this video, and make sure you're subscribed if you play fantasy football. Really helps support us. Obviously, doing a solo video. It's 12:22 a.m. here, and so I appreciate you guys if you drop a like and subscribe. You can check out the season pass and get our algo to help you draft for your fantasy football drafts this weekend. And also, if you've already had your draft, then we have all the tools to help you dominate your fantasy football season with it as well. Again, it's $34, and it takes care of you for the entire year. You get all access to the Flock site for just $30. So check it out in the link in the pinned comment. Appreciate you guys. We'll see you later.